They told him to let the dying foal go. But what happened next turned a poor man's silence into a miracle heard around the world. The winter they said he should let the albino foal die was the coldest one Montana had seen in years. A poor farmer, worn by loss and debt, lifted his hand anyway and changed both their fates. What began as an act of pity soon became a story whispered across the plains, where light was born from the weakest life. The snow had a way of swallowing sound in Montana. Soft, endless, merciless. It was the kind that turned the whole world into a whisper. Outside the old livestock yard, wind howled down from the northern ridge, rattling the frozen metal gates until they sang like tired ghosts. Inside, the air smelled of hay, diesel, and cold iron. Men in heavy coats stomped their boots, trading coffee and gossip, their laughter sharp and hollow in the freezing light. No one paid much attention to Lot 17, a rusted pen tucked against the far wall. The sign hanging crookedly on the bars read, "Albino Foal, unfit." Behind the bars, a small white filly trembled under the flicker of the overhead lamp. Her coat, thin as frost, clung to a frame too fragile for winter. Her eyes, pink and blinking, reflected the light like two bruised pearls. Every exhale came out as a cloud that vanished before it reached the cold air. "Too weak," someone muttered, tossing a straw at her. "You'd be better off turning her into glue." Another man snorted. "That thing wouldn't make it through a week in the sun. Hell, she won't make it through tonight." Laughter followed. Brief, careless, the kind that didn't come from cruelty, but from the comfort of not caring. At the back of the crowd, Jack Turner shifted his weight. His coat was old, frayed at the cuffs, the kind that had weathered too many winters and too few harvests. A farmer without a farm. That's what they called him now. Once, he'd had 50 acres, and a wife who could make a house smell like cinnamon in winter. Now there was only the land he rented, the debts he couldn't pay, and a silence that hung around his neck like a stone. The auctioneer's voice cracked through the noise. "Lot 17, albino filly, unfit for breeding. Let's start at $10. No one moved. "5?" he tried again. The crowd turned back to their coffee, to the next lot that might earn them something. The foal shifted, her hooves slipping on the ice. The chain on the gate rattled. And then, a voice from the back, quiet but steady. 50. Heads turned. The auctioneer squinted through the steam of his breath. 50? You sure, Turner? Jack nodded once. I'm sure. A few men chuckled, one shaking his head. You gone soft, Jack? Someone called. Jack didn't answer. He was looking at the filly, the way she tried to make herself small, to disappear. Something in that tremor looked familiar. Like the way he used to feel walking into the bank, knowing he had nothing left to give. 50 once, 50 twice. Sold to the fool in the back, the auctioneer said, his gavel hitting the block with a dull thud. Jack stepped forward, his boots crunching over the icy concrete. The crowd parted for him, curiosity hanging in the air like fog. He stopped at the pen. The foal pressed herself into the corner, trembling. Her skin shimmered pale under the dim light. Easy now, he murmured, unlatching the gate. The hinges creaked, the filly's breath came fast and shallow. No one's gonna hurt you. It took nearly 10 minutes to get the rope over her neck. Every small move sent her flinching. Every sound made her shudder. But Jack didn't rush. He'd learned patience the hard way, through long winters and longer silences. When she finally stepped toward him, one trembling hoof at a time, he whispered, "That's it. Good girl." They left the laughter behind. Outside, the wind hit them like a wall. Snow whirled through the yard, stinging Jack's face, clinging to the foal's thin coat. He pulled her close, wrapping his coat around her neck. She was light as a ghost, bones beneath skin. His old pickup truck idled near the gate, smoke rising from the exhaust like a tired sigh. Jack lifted the tailgate, spreading an old blanket inside, one his late wife had sewn years ago. He led the filly up the ramp, whispering nonsense just to keep her calm. When she finally settled, he secured the latch and climbed into the driver's seat. The heater barely worked. He rubbed his hands together, staring at his reflection in the windshield. The lines on his face looked deeper in the half-light. "Well," he muttered, "looks like it's just you and me now." As he pulled onto the road, snowflakes streaked across the headlights like shooting stars. The radio hummed static until a country station broke through, soft and crackling. A love song from 20 years ago. Jack reached to turn it off, then didn't. In the mirror, the foal was barely visible, just a blur of white against the dark. Her ears twitched at the sound of the engine. Jack lowered the window an inch, letting the wind carry his voice back. "Hang in there, little one," he said. "We'll find you a place to stand." The road wound through the plains, flanked by ghostly fence posts half buried in snow. The night stretched ahead, quiet and merciless. But inside that old truck, beneath the hum of the tires and the whisper of the wind, something fragile had begun to stir. Not warmth, not yet, but the smallest flicker of belonging. And as the lights of the auction yard disappeared behind them, Jack Turner smiled for the first time in months, though no one was there to see it. The highway out of Billings was a ribbon of black, cutting through miles of white. Snow fell steady, thick as sifted flour, blanketing the land in a silence that pressed against the windows. Jack's truck groaned on every curve, the old engine coughing like an asthmatic beast. Inside, the heater hissed weakly, doing little to fight the cold that crept through the floorboards. His hands were cracked, knuckles raw from years of frost and fence wire. The filly lay in the back beneath the tarp, her small chest rising and falling so faintly that Jack checked the mirror every few minutes just to make sure she was still alive. Every time her ears twitched, relief softened his features. He hadn't realized how long it had been since he'd cared whether something lived or died. He drove past dark fields where cattle huddled against the fences, their breath thick in the moonlight. The radio stuttered between static and bits of a weather report warning of another cold front coming down from Canada. Jack turned it off. The only sound he wanted was the rhythmic hum of the tires and the occasional shuffle of the foal shifting her weight. The road narrowed into gravel. A faded wooden sign read, "Turner Acres," though most of the letters had long since peeled away. He smiled wryly at the irony. There was hardly an acre left that truly belonged to him. The bank had claimed the good pastures 2 winters ago, and the rest was leased land barely worth the effort. But he still called it home, the same way a broken watch still called itself time. He parked beside the sagging barn, the headlights catching on the warped planks. The roof was patched with tin, snow piling in uneven drifts along the eaves. Jack cut the engine and sat for a long moment, the ticking of the cooling metal filling the cab. The quiet was so deep, it felt alive. He could hear the faint rustle of the filly shifting under the tarp. "All right," he murmured. "Let's get you inside." The cold slapped him as he opened the door. The air smelled of pine and old hay. His boots sank into the snow with soft crunches. He lowered the tailgate, the hinges squealing like a complaint from an old friend. The filly blinked against the light, her breath steaming. She didn't try to move until Jack spoke again. "Come on, girl, one step at a time." He coaxed her down, his voice slow, even, like he was talking to something broken that still wanted to live. Her legs trembled, thin as saplings, but she followed him. Inside the barn, he spread what was left of his hay on the dirt floor. The smell of dried grass filled the cold air, mixing with the faint sweetness of molasses feed. The place was dim, the single bulb flickering overhead. Dust motes drifted through the light like tiny ghosts. Jack worked in silence. Old habit, the kind built from years of solitude. He nailed a few boards over the draft in the wall, rolled out a wool blanket in the corner, and filled a bucket with water he'd warmed on the stove. When he turned, the filly was watching him, her pink eyes soft, uncertain. "You're safe here," he said quietly. "For now, that's all I can promise." He poured a handful of oats into a tin pan. The foal took one hesitant step forward, then another. Her muzzle brushed his palm, feather light, before she began to eat. Jack's throat tightened. He didn't remember the last time something had trusted him enough to get close. Outside, the wind moaned against the barn walls. Inside, the faint sound of chewing filled the space. Gentle, steady, alive. Jack sat down on an overturned crate, rubbing his hands together for warmth. The light cast long shadows, stretching across the hay and the tired boards. For the first time in months, the silence around him didn't feel empty. It felt full. Hours passed. The storm thickened. When he finally stood to leave, the foal lifted her head, following his movement. "Easy," he murmured, and she lowered her gaze again. He turned off the light and stepped outside. The cold was sharp enough to bite. He pulled his coat tighter, looked up at the sky, an ocean of gray swallowing the stars, and whispered, "You picked a hell of a night to start over, kid." Inside the house, the air smelled faintly of dust and wood smoke. The rooms were small and tired, a sagging couch, a table scarred with old knife marks, and a single photograph on the wall, his wife, Emily, smiling in the sunlight. He poured himself coffee that had gone cold hours ago and sat at the table. From the barn came a muffled sound, a soft snort, followed by silence. Jack closed his eyes and listened. He imagined the foal curling into the hay, her heartbeat steadying, her breath warming the cold. Somewhere deep inside him, a thought flickered. Small, almost shy. Maybe she'll make it. Maybe we both will. He rubbed the back of his neck, feeling the weight of years there. Outside, the wind howled again, but this time it sounded less like a warning and more like a lullaby. Before going to bed, Jack stepped onto the porch one last time. Snow swept across the valley, glittering under the half-moon. The barn light glowed faintly in the distance, a single lantern in a sea of dark. He stood there until his fingers went numb. "Welcome home, Luna," he said softly, testing the name that had come unbidden to his mind. It hung in the air for a moment, then disappeared into the falling snow. That night, Jack dreamed for the first time in years, not of debt or loss or empty harvests, but of light spilling over a white field and a small horse running through it, free. The wind prowled around the barn like a restless animal, rattling the tin roof, seeping through the gaps between the planks. Jack Turner worked by lantern light, his breath clouding in front of him. He spread a thicker layer of straw, tucked the wool blanket closer around the foal's narrow frame, and checked the latch twice before stepping back. The glow of the flame cast both of their shadows on the far wall, one tall and tired, the other small and shivering. Luna's ribs moved with each shallow breath. Her skin twitched at every sound, the creak of timber, the distant moan of the wind. Jack crouched down, elbows on, his knees. "You're safe," he said again, softer than a prayer. He wasn't sure who needed to hear it more, her or himself. He filled a dented kettle from the water bucket and poured it into an old tin bowl. Steam curled into the cold air. When he slid it near her, she sniffed once, twice, before dipping her muzzle to drink. The sight made something ease in his chest. It had been years since anything had trusted him enough to accept what he offered. The lantern hissed. Jack leaned against a beam, stretching his back. His fingers ached from the day's labor. Outside, the storm thickened until even the barn doors seemed to breathe under its weight. Somewhere beyond the valley, a coyote called, a long, thin note of hunger. Luna's ears flicked toward the sound, her body stiffening. Jack rose and moved slowly to her side. He placed a steady hand near her neck, not touching, just close enough for her to feel his warmth. "Easy, girl," he murmured. The coyote's cry faded. The foal lowered her head again. When he finally left the barn, the clock on the wall of his small house read nearly midnight. He shed his coat by the door, the fabric crusted with frost. The house smelled faintly of pine ash and loneliness. He sat at the table, flipping open an old notebook once used for feed inventory. Now it held only scattered lines, half-thoughts, numbers that no longer mattered. He took a pencil and wrote, "Luna drank water tonight. Maybe that's enough for now." He stared at the words until they blurred. Then he shut the notebook, blew out the lamp, and let the dark settle. He woke just before dawn. The silence outside was uncanny, the kind that follows a night of heavy snow. He dressed quickly, pulling on frozen boots, and stepped into the still world. The yard lay buried, fences softened under a clean white drift. When he opened the barn door, the warm smell of straw and animal breath greeted him like a held-in sigh. Luna lifted her head. Frost clung to her eyelashes, but her eyes were clear. "Morning," he said. She blinked, the closest thing she had to answering. Jack moved quietly, refilling the water, laying out more feed. He checked the nails in the boards, replaced one that had bent loose. Every small task felt like stitching something invisible back together. He hummed under his breath, an old tune Emily used to sing when the calves were born early. The melody wove through the air, soft and sure. As the morning light grew, he noticed Luna watching him. When he paused, she took one hesitant step forward, then stopped. He stayed still. The space between them filled with the sound of her breathing and the steady drip of melting ice from the rafters. She took another step, her hooves sinking into the straw. Then, slowly, she reached out and touched her nose to his sleeve. Jack didn't move. He let her scent him, the faint salt of sweat and earth that marked every farmer in the valley. When she pulled back, her eyes met his for the first time. Unflinching, pink and gentle. The connection lasted no longer than a heartbeat, but it was enough to shake something loose inside him, something he'd buried years ago when the laughter stopped echoing in his kitchen. He stepped outside later to split wood for the stove. The snow reflected sunlight so bright it burned. Each strike of the axe rang through the quiet. Between blows, he found himself glancing toward the barn, listening for a sound that meant she was still there. He wasn't sure when he'd started measuring time by her breathing instead of the ticking of the clock. At noon, the local mail carrier drove up the lane, engine sputtering. Jack waved him off before he could get out. "No mail today," he said. The man shrugged, eyed the barn, then nodded once before turning around. Jack watched the truck disappear down the road, the tire tracks already filling with snow. Inside the barn again, he found Luna standing. Not fully steady, but on her feet. She turned her head toward him as he entered, ears pricked forward. He froze, afraid even to breathe. Then she took a trembling step, then another, her hooves sliding but holding. When she reached him, she nudged his chest once before collapsing gently into the straw. Jack dropped to his knees beside her, laughing under his breath. It was a sound rusty with disuse. "You're tougher than you look," he whispered. Luna's ears flicked at his voice, her body relaxing. He stroked the coarse hair along her neck, careful of the thin skin. The rhythm of his hand slowed, syncing with her breath until both of them found the same quiet. That evening, the temperature dropped hard again. The horizon burned orange behind the snowfields before fading into indigo. Jack built a small fire in the metal drum outside the barn door. He stood with his hands stretched toward the heat, eyes on the distant tree line. Above him, the first stars flickered through the pale sky. Behind him, Luna let out a low nicker, a sound halfway between a sigh and a question. He turned, smiling without thinking. "Yeah," he said. "I'm here." He went back inside and sat near her stall, the firelight from outside slipping through the cracks in the wall. She dozed, her sides rising steady now, no longer frantic. Jack leaned back against the beam, the warmth from the lantern pooling around them both. The night deepened. The storm was gone. In its place came a stillness so complete it made the heart slow to match it. Jack found himself whispering into the dim air, not sure if he meant to speak at all. "We made it through the first night, girl." Her ear twitched, as if she understood. He smiled, eyes half closed. "That's a start." The lantern flickered once, then steadied. Beyond the barn, the valley slept under its white blanket, and for the first time in years, Jack Turner felt the kind of peace that doesn't need words. January settled over the valley like a blanket laid by a tired hand. The storms grew less violent, but the cold sank deeper, rooting itself into the bones of the land. Days shortened to a pale strip of light between two long stretches of darkness. Jack Turner began to live by smaller measures of time. When the kettle whistled, when the horses breathed, when the frost reached the top of the fence post outside. He rose before dawn every morning. The barn light flicked on, a lone star in the white expanse. Inside, his breath hung in clouds. Luna would lift her head at the sound of his boots, ears flicking toward him as if to say she'd been waiting. Her body filled out little by little, ribs fading under the thin coat that gleamed faintly even in the half-light. The routine anchored him. Feed, water, clean, repeat. Some mornings he spoke to her as if to another person. "You're tougher than you look," he'd mutter, sliding hay into the trough. "Guess we both are." His voice bounced softly off the wooden beams, landing somewhere between confession and prayer. Luna would blink, the pink of her eyes deepening to rose under the glow of the lantern. By mid-morning, sunlight streamed through the cracks in the barn walls, turning dust into gold. Jack used to hate the way the light exposed everything, the broken boards, the cobwebs, the years of neglect. But now he welcomed it. It made the place feel alive. He'd stand at the open door, mug of coffee steaming in his hand, watching Luna step cautiously in her small enclosure. Each time she lifted her legs higher, steadier, he felt the same quiet satisfaction as watching winter wheat break through frost. In the afternoons, he mended fences or shoveled paths through the drifts. The rhythm of work kept him steady. His hands, cracked and scarred, remembered every motion without needing his mind to follow. He caught himself humming again. Sometimes it was an old country tune, other times just a sound to fill the air. The melody slipped easily into the stillness, as natural as the snow falling off the barn roof. Every evening, he sat beside Luna while she ate. The smell of hay and warm breath filled the narrow space. The barn was alive with small sounds, the creak of wood, the hiss of the lantern, the slow rhythm of chewing. He had come to know every one of them. He'd forgotten what it felt like to be comforted by such ordinary things. One night, after finishing the chores, he leaned on the stall door and spoke softly. "You ever wonder what people would say if they could see us now?" Luna flicked her ears. "Probably think I've gone crazy, talking to a horse." He smiled, then added, "But you listen better than most folks ever did." Outside, snow began to fall again, big, lazy flakes drifting in the light from the doorway. Jack turned off the lantern and stood watching them. The quiet was immense. He could hear his own heartbeat, steady and human, against the deeper pulse of the land. For a moment, it felt as if everything, snow, wind, breath, was moving in, the same rhythm. By February, Luna was strong enough to walk the small paddock when the weather allowed. Jack wrapped burlap around her neck to keep the chill from her skin, though she seemed to tolerate the cold better now. He opened the gate each morning and let her take a few steps into the pale sunlight. The first time she did, her hooves sank into the snow, and she froze, eyes wide. Jack stood at her side. "It's just light," he said quietly. "You'll get used to it." She did, step by slow step. The sun caught in her coat, throwing back a shimmer that reminded Jack of frozen rivers in March. Fragile, beautiful, defiant. Watching her move through the brightness, he felt something thaw in him too. It wasn't happiness exactly, but it was close enough to recognize. The days began to string together in gentle repetition. The valley's silence was no longer the silence of emptiness, but of patience, like the pause between breaths. Jack started keeping small notes again. "Luna walked 10 paces today. She ate from my hand. Didn't flinch when I opened the door. Each line was a heartbeat written down, proof that they were both still here." At night he sometimes caught his reflection in the window, older, rougher, but alive in a way he hadn't been for years. He'd raise his mug toward the barn, a quiet toast. "To small miracles," he'd say. One morning near the end of winter, the world turned pink before dawn. Jack stepped out into the cold, coffee steaming in the cup between his palms. The air was so still he could hear the crackle of ice on the river half a mile away. Inside the barn, Luna was already standing. waiting. He laughed softly. "Guess you don't need me to wake you anymore." He brushed her coat, the bristles sliding over muscle where bone had once shown. Her head lowered until it rested lightly against his chest. The weight of it startled him. Warm, alive, trusting. He stood still, afraid to breathe too deeply and break the spell. That afternoon, he opened both barn doors wide. Light flooded in, fierce and clean. For the first time, Luna didn't shy from it. She stepped forward into the glow, her body outlined in silver. Jack leaned on the doorframe, the cold biting his face, and whispered, "You're not just surviving anymore, are you?" She turned her head slightly, as if she'd heard. Behind them, the hills shone like wild glass, and the wind carried the faint scent of thawing pine. Winter was far from over, but for the first time, Jack didn't dread the next storm. He knew what waited on the other side. The first time Jack noticed the boy, it was one of those March mornings when the world didn't quite know what season it wanted to be. The snow was melting, but the air still carried the bite of winter. Jack was mending a section of fence along the east line, his gloves soaked and stiff, when he saw a small figure standing at the edge of the property. The kid couldn't have been more than 4, a thin silhouette in a puffy red jacket 2 sizes too big. He wore no hat, no gloves, just clutched a wooden stick that dragged behind him, marking a line in the snow. He didn't wave, didn't move, just watched. Jack straightened, wiping his brow. "You lost, kid?" No answer. The boy just stared, his head tilting slightly like a curious bird. Then, slowly, he turned his gaze toward the barn. "Ah," Jack said softly. "You're looking at her." Luna was visible through the half-open doors, her white coat catching the light like she was made of it. The boy took a step forward. Jack could see the uncertainty in the way his shoulders hunched, as if ready to flee. "It's all right," Jack said, lowering his voice. "She doesn't bite." Still no response. The boy took another step, then another, until he stood at the gate. His stick scraped against the post. Jack leaned on the fence. "You got a name?" The boy hesitated. Eyes on Luna. Finally, in a voice so small it nearly disappeared into the wind, he said, "Tommy." "Well, Tommy," Jack said, "you like horses?" A nod. Quick, nervous. "Good. She could use someone to talk to besides me." That was the beginning of it. The quiet visits, the unspoken understanding between a man who'd forgotten how to talk, and a boy who'd never learned how. Every few days, Tommy would show up. Sometimes he'd help carry water, sometimes he'd just stand near the fence, watching Luna graze. He never asked questions, never said more than a few words. But his eyes softened when he looked at the horse, and that was enough. Jack learned what little he could from the neighbors. The boy lived half a mile down the road with his mother, a nurse who worked double shifts in Great Falls. "He's a quiet one," folks said. "Doesn't take to people much." Jack understood that. Some souls just carried too much noise inside to add more from the outside. One afternoon, the wind picked up, and Jack found Tommy sitting inside the barn, legs crossed, tracing shapes in the dust. Luna stood beside him, her muzzle nearly brushing his shoulder. The boy didn't flinch. He reached up and touched her neck, carefully, reverently, as though he were touching something holy. Jack stopped in the doorway, unwilling to break the moment. The sight did something to him, something deep and wordless. The boy's small hand on that fragile, living creature. It was like watching 2 pieces of the same wound learn how to heal. Luna lowered her head, breathing against the boy's hair. Tommy giggled, a sound bright and pure, startling in its rarity. Jack couldn't help smiling. Later, when Tommy's mother came to collect him, she apologized for the intrusion. "He doesn't usually go anywhere," she said, "but he's been talking about that white horse for a week." Jack waved it off. "He's welcome here." After that, Tommy came nearly every afternoon. Sometimes they worked side by side, in silence, mending fences or cleaning the stalls. Other times, Jack taught him how to brush Luna's coat, how to move slow so she wouldn't startle. "You can't rush a horse like her," he'd explain. "You just breathe with her. Let her know you ain't going anywhere." Tommy would nod, concentrating hard, his brow furrowed as if memorizing every motion. Luna responded to him in ways she never had with anyone else. She'd lean her head against his shoulder, close her eyes, sigh. It was as if she recognized something in him, the same gentleness, the same scar. Jack began to notice the change in the boy. His steps grew lighter, his shoulders less guarded. He started talking, just a little, about school, about how the kids called him strange, about his dream of becoming a vet one day. Jack listened. He didn't offer advice. He just let the boy's words fill the spaces that used to be empty. One evening, while the sky turned copper over the mountains, Tommy asked, "Why did you save her?" Jack was quiet for a long time. The wind played with the strands of hay on the floor. Finally, he said, "Because someone has to believe in what's left behind, even if it's just a horse." The boy looked at Luna, then at Jack. "She believes in you, too." Jack smiled, a faint, crooked smile that reached his eyes. "Maybe we all believe in each other now." Spring crept in slow. The snow retreated to the shadows, leaving behind patches of wet earth that smelled of life. Luna's coat gleamed under the sun, no longer thin but smooth, her muscles defined from the long walks in the paddock. Tommy's laughter became a regular sound in the yard, and Jack found himself waiting for it each day, like he used to wait for morning coffee. One afternoon, while they worked side by side cleaning tack, Tommy said quietly, "Mom says I should spend time with people, but I like being here better." Jack looked up from the saddle strap he was oiling. "This counts, doesn't it?" Tommy grinned. "Yeah, it does." When the boy left that evening, Jack stood on the porch and watched his small figure disappear down the dirt road. The setting sun turned the snowmelt into rivers of gold. He felt something stir in his chest, a kind of gratitude that hurt to hold. Inside the barn, Luna shifted in her stall, letting out a soft whinny. Jack walked over, ran his hand along her neck. "You did good today," he said. "You're teaching more than I ever could." She blinked, ears flicking, as if she understood. That night, Jack wrote another line in his notebook. The boy smiled today. Luna stood still while he brushed her. Maybe this is what healing looks like. The words looked strange under his rough handwriting, like something too delicate to belong on paper. He closed the book and set it beside the lantern. Outside, the stars came out one by one, sharp and cold against the dark. Jack stepped to the door, breathing in the scent of hay and earth. He could hear faint laughter from down the road, Tommy's voice carried by the wind. "Good night, kid," he murmured, and turned off the light. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel like the last man left in the valley. There was life here again, small, fragile, miraculous. And it was enough. By early April, the snow had surrendered to mud and patches of new grass. The valley smelled of thawing earth, a scent that clung to Jack's boots, and the sleeves of his flannel shirt. He and Tommy were out mending the south fence when the first truck from town slowed on the highway. The driver, a man Jack knew from the feed store, leaned his arm out the window and called, "Heard you're still feeding that ghost horse, Turner. She paying rent yet?" Laughter trailed behind the exhaust as the truck rumbled away. Jack didn't answer. He just hammered another nail into the post. Tommy watched him, face tightening. "Why do they say that?" the boy asked. "People talk," Jack said. "They always have." But the talk grew louder in the weeks that followed. Down at the hardware store, men made jokes about Turner's miracle horse, betting on how long before she'd die. A clerk at the co-op refused to extend his credit line. Even Marianne, the vet who'd helped him once before, pulled him aside when she came to deliver antibiotics for a neighbor's cattle. "Jack," she said gently, "that filly was born with albinism. You can't keep her out here. Her skin burns. Her heart's weak. I'm just trying to save you the heartbreak." Jack folded his arms, his jaw working. "Maybe heartbreak's what I've got left to spend." That night he lay awake, listening to the wind scrape along the siding. Every creak of the house sounded like the judgment of the town pressing in. He thought of the barn, the fragile life breathing just a few yards away, and of how easy it would be to quit, to sell what little he owned, walk away, let silence finish what time had started. But when dawn came, he pulled on his boots and went back out, because she'd be waiting, and he couldn't stand the thought of her waiting for no one. The morning light was thin, washed out, the kind of light that makes the world look half-finished. Luna stood near the gate, her coat glowing faintly against the dim sky. Jack brushed her gently, checking her skin for burns. Each stroke of the brush brought up a faint sheen of silver. He spoke softly, almost to himself. "They don't know what they're seeing." Tommy arrived after school, bringing an old apple wrapped in his jacket pocket. Luna took it from his palm, crunching happily. "She's better," the boy said. "She's fightin'," Jack replied. The next day, a letter came. The bank. Another warning about the overdue mortgage. Jack read it standing by the sink, the paper trembling slightly in his calloused hands. He let out a slow breath and set it aside. Outside, he could hear Luna, pawing at the dirt, restless. "You and me both, girl," he muttered. "They all think we're done." A week later, the first real storm of spring rolled in. Wind howled down from the hills, carrying sheets of icy rain. The barn rattled, the door hinges screaming. Jack worked through the downpour, reinforcing the latch, moving bales to block the drafts. Lightning flashed, revealing the fields stretched out like black water. Luna pressed herself into the corner, trembling. Jack threw his coat over her back, his own shirt soaking through. "Easy now," he said. "You've been through worse." She whinnied, high and sharp, and he felt the sound vibrate through his ribs. He stayed with her through the night, the storm hammering the roof. The laughter of the town might as well have been the thunder outside, loud, meaningless, impossible to silence. When the wind finally died, dawn came cold and colorless. Jack's arms ached from holding the door shut, his clothes plastered to his skin. Luna stood steady again, her breath visible in the chill. He rubbed her neck, his voice hoarse. "Still here," he said. "That's all that matters." By midday, the sun returned. He went into town for feed, the mud drying on his truck tires. Inside the general store, conversation hushed when he entered. Someone coughed. Another smirked. "How's the albino princess?" one man asked. "Still worth that $50? Jack set his jaw, stacking 2 sacks of grain on the counter. "Worth every penny," he said. When he left, laughter followed him out the door, sharp as gravel underfoot. He drove home slow, the road shimmering with puddles. From the crest of the hill, he saw the barn, small against the vast land, sunlight spilling across the roof. Something about the sight steadied him. He parked by the fence and sat for a long moment, hands resting on the wheel. In the paddock, Luna lifted her head. Even from here, he could see the faint pink of her eyes catch the light. She looked fragile still, but she was standing. That alone felt like defiance. Tommy was waiting by the gate when Jack got out. "They don't know," the boy said quietly. "No," Jack answered, "and maybe they don't have to." Together they led Luna into the open field, letting her stretch her legs. Her steps were uneven at first, then smoother. The wind caught her mane, lifting it like a banner. Jack watched, a smile ghosting across his face. "Let 'em laugh," he said. "We'll keep walking." For a while, the only sound was the rustle of grass and the soft thud of hooves against damp earth. The town could keep its jokes. The world out here had its own kind of truth. One that spoke in breath and sunlight, in survival measured not by profit, but by grace. That evening, the valley burned gold. Jack stood at the fence, watching Luna graze, her white coat glowing like a promise. He thought about the letters, the laughter, the long road ahead. He thought about Emily and the years he'd spent hiding from hope. And for the first time, he didn't feel ashamed of what people saw when they looked at him. He turned to Tommy, who leaned beside him, quiet as always. "You know, kid," he said, "they say she ain't worth saving. But maybe she's saving us instead." Tommy smiled faintly. Maybe she already did. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of rain and hay. Jack let the silence stretch, heavy, but not lonely. Somewhere behind the barn, a meadowlark began to sing, thin, persistent, and brave enough to be heard. He lifted his chin toward the sound. "Let 'em talk," he said softly. "We'll just keep proving 'em wrong." As the light faded, Luna lifted her head, ears twitching toward his voice. Her gaze found him across the field, and for a fleeting second, he felt it. The unspoken language between the broken and the healing, between what the world discards and what endures. And when darkness finally fell, it was not the laughter of the town that echoed in his mind, but the steady rhythm of a heart that refused to quit. The sky turned the color of lead by afternoon. A wind came crawling out of the mountains, carrying the smell of ice and something sharper, like electricity waiting to be born. Jack Turner felt it before he saw it. The way animals grew restless, the way the air thickened, holding its breath. He'd been through enough Montana winters to know. A storm was coming, and it wasn't the kind you could ride out easy. He finished securing the last latch on the hay shed and looked across the pasture. Luna stood by the fence line, head high, tail twitching, her white coat luminous against the dark horizon. Even from here, she looked uneasy, ears flicking toward the wind that whispered secrets through the grass. Tommy was by her side, tightening the rope around a gate post, his face pale under the gray light. "Go home, kid," Jack called. "Your mama's gonna worry." Tommy shook his head. "I can help." Jack hesitated. The boy's stubbornness reminded him too much of himself at that age, young enough to believe that helping meant staying, no matter the danger. He sighed. "All right. But when the first lightning hits, you run for the house. Understand?" They worked until dusk. The wind picked up, bending the tall grass flat, snapping the loose tin on the barn roof. Jack drove the horses into the stalls, double-checking every hinge. The first flakes of sleet hit his neck like thrown gravel. Luna pawed at the ground, snorting, eyes wide. Jack ran his hand along her neck, feeling the tremor beneath her skin. "It's all right, girl," he whispered. "It'll pass." But the storm didn't pass. It came down the valley in a roar, a wall of white swallowing everything. Rain turned to snow, snow to ice. The barn shuddered as gusts slammed into it. The world outside vanished. No horizon, no fence line, just a storm trying to erase everything it touched. Jack and Tommy huddled inside, sealing the gaps with feed sacks. The lamps flickered in the draft. "That wind sounds angry," Tommy muttered, his voice trembling despite his effort to sound brave. Jack managed a thin smile. "It's just wind, son. It yells a lot but doesn't mean much." But then the roof moaned, and a sheet of snow slid off with a sound like thunder. Luna let out a sharp whinny, rearing against the stall boards. Jack grabbed the rope, steadying her. The smell of her fear, hot, animal, raw, filled the space. "Easy, easy," he said, though his own pulse was pounding just as hard. The lights went out. Darkness fell thick as smoke. The only sound was the hammering of wind and the frantic breath of the animals. Tommy's small flashlight cut a trembling circle through the dark. "The door!" he shouted. One of the outer latches had snapped. Snow was forcing its way inside in pale waves. Jack shoved against it, straining until his shoulders burned. "Grab the rope!" he yelled. Together they lashed the door shut, snow stinging their faces. The storm roared like a living thing, testing every seam. Hours blurred into a single long moment of noise and effort. Jack lost track of time. He only knew the ache in his arms, the cold biting through his gloves, the way Luna's trembling grew fainter as exhaustion replaced panic. At one point the boy slumped beside a feed bin, lips blue. Jack threw his coat over him, forcing a smile. "You hold on, Tommy. We've seen worse nights than this." But he wasn't sure they had. When the storm's fury peaked, lightning tore open the sky. For one blinding second, the whole barn glowed white. Jack saw the world outside, the trees bent double, snow flying sideways, the fence posts half buried already, and then the thunder cracked so loud it shook the rafters. A moment later came the smell of smoke. He froze. "No," he whispered. The lightning had struck somewhere behind the ridge. Through the cracks in the door, a faint orange flicker pulsed against the storm. Fire. The shed. He felt his stomach drop. "Stay here," he said. "Don't move." Tommy's eyes went wide. "Jack!" But Jack was already moving. The wind hit him like a wall when he stepped outside. He pushed into it, head down, snow slicing across his face. The orange glow grew brighter. Sparks rode the wind like insects made of light. The shed's roof was burning, the flames snapping like flags in the gale. He grabbed a blanket from the ground, soaked it in the snow, and beat at the fire, each swing throwing sparks into the night. Smoke stung his eyes. His lungs screamed. Behind him, a faint sound rose, a sharp neigh that cut through the wind. Luna. He turned. Through the blur of snow, he saw her, half out of the stall, fighting against the rope. Tommy stood by her, pulling on the lead line. "She won't stay!" the boy cried. Jack stumbled toward them, coughing. "Let her go!" The words were lost in The storm. Luna bolted through the half-open door, head low, mane whipping in the wind. For a moment, her white body disappeared into the snow, then reappeared closer to the burning shed. Jack shouted, but the sound was swallowed by the gale. The mare circled the flames, stamping, as if challenging the fire itself. And then Jack saw why. Two small shapes huddled in the lee of the wall. Stray foals from the neighbor's pasture, trapped by fallen boards. Luna plunged forward. Jack followed, the snow up to his knees. She pressed her body against the wind, shielding the smaller horses. Jack tore the boards loose, his hands numb. Together they drove the frightened foals toward the paddock gate, away from the heat. A gust hit, driving sparks across Luna's flank. She flinched, but didn't move. Jack threw the wet blanket over her, patting her neck. "That's it, girl. Just hold." The fire hissed as snow poured in from the sky, dampening its hunger. The flames shrank, then guttered out. Only smoke remained, curling into the dark. When it was over, Jack slumped to his knees beside Luna. She stood trembling, her sides heaving, steam rising off her coat. Tommy ran up, breath ragged, tears freezing on his cheeks. "You're bleeding," he said. Jack wiped his forehead with a shaky hand. It wasn't his blood. It was soot and sweat. He looked up at the mare. "No," he said softly. "She's the one who saved us." They walked back to the barn in silence. The wind was easing now, the snow falling straight instead of sideways. Inside, the horses were quiet. Their fear burned out like the last embers of the fire. Jack guided Luna to her stall, running his hands along her neck. A few burns, nothing deep. He whispered, "You're all right. You did good." Tommy leaned against the wall, shivering. "I thought we were gonna die." Jack chuckled wearily. "Not tonight." He glanced at the lantern still flickering weakly on the shelf. Tonight, the storm met its match. When dawn came, the valley lay still under a blanket of perfect white. The shed was gone, reduced to a black scar in the snow. Jack stepped outside, the cold air biting but clean. Luna followed him to the gate, her breath rising in soft clouds. He looked out over the ruined field, then down at her. "You didn't just survive," he said quietly. "You fought back." The mare flicked her ears, eyes calm, steady. Behind them, Tommy came out, rubbing his hands. "They'll never believe it," he said. Jack smiled. "Then maybe we just don't tell them. Let the land keep the story." The boy nodded. The wind moved through the pines, carrying away the last trace of smoke. For the rest of that morning, the three of them worked side by side, repairing what they could, saying little. The storm had taken plenty, but it had left something behind too, an understanding, unspoken and strong as the quiet after thunder. When the sun rose higher, Jack turned to Luna and brushed the ash from her mane. "You did good, girl," he whispered again. And though the world was still frozen, for the first time, it felt warm. When the world woke, it was quiet again. Too quiet. The storm had scrubbed the valley clean, leaving everything covered in a hard, shining crust of white. The sky was the pale blue of old porcelain, so still it looked fragile enough to break. Jack Turner stood in the doorway of the barn, steam rising from his coffee, watching the light creep over the snow. It didn't seem real that a few hours ago the same valley had screamed with wind and fire. The barn still smelled faintly of smoke and singed hay. Luna shifted in her stall, tail flicking softly. Her coat was darkened with ash around the shoulders, but her eyes were steady, calm in a way that made Jack feel small. He reached out to stroke her neck, his voice hoarse. "You're all right," he said. "You did good." Tommy came in a few minutes later, wrapped in one of Jack's old flannel shirts, the sleeves rolled to his elbows. He held 2 mugs of cocoa, one spilling over the rim. His hair was flattened from sleep, his face pale but bright. "You didn't come in last night," he said. Jack nodded. "Didn't want to leave her." They drank in silence, listening to the slow creak of the rafters. Outside, the sunlight hit the drifts, throwing shards of brightness through the cracks in the boards. Everything shimmered: the fence posts, the roof of the ruined shed, even the smoke that still curled faintly from the ashes. By mid-morning, the road crews started clearing the highway. The sound of engines carried faintly across the fields. Jack stepped outside, his boots crunching through the snow. The shed was a black scar against the glittering landscape, a hole where something once stood. He ran his glove along the charred edge of a beam, the wood crumbling under his touch. It could have been worse, he thought. So much worse. Behind him, Luna snorted. She'd followed him into the yard, her breath misting in the cold air. The 2 rescued foals were huddled near the fence, their small bodies pressed together for warmth. Jack smiled faintly. "Guess we've got a few more mouths to feed," he said. Tommy laughed. It was a small sound, but sharp as sunlight. "Mom said we could help build another shed. She's bringing nails." Jack looked down at him, surprised. "She's coming out here?" "She said after what happened, you might need a hand." The boy paused, glancing toward Luna. "Everybody's talking about you in town. About her." Jack frowned. "That so?" "Yeah. Somebody from the fire department took a picture. They said it looked like she was guarding you, standing between you and the fire. It's all over Facebook." Tommy grinned, pulling out his phone. "They're calling her the Ghost Horse of Montana." Jack chuckled under his breath. "Ghost Horse, huh? She'd like that." By afternoon, trucks began to appear, along the road. Neighbors who'd barely spoken to Jack in years now came by with bales of hay and tools. One woman brought a casserole, another handed over blankets. "Saw the photo," she said, shaking her head. "Didn't believe it till I did. That horse saved you, Turner." Jack didn't argue. He just smiled, accepted what they brought, and kept working. Together they cleared the debris, laid new boards, nailed up tarps for the foals' shelter. The sound of hammers and conversation filled the valley, a different kind of noise, warm instead of cruel. When evening fell, the light turned copper, bleeding across the snow. The small group of helpers drifted away, leaving the farm quiet again. Jack leaned against the fence, watching Luna graze in the fading light. Her coat had taken on a golden glow, the fire's ash now dusted off, replaced by the color of peace. Tommy stood beside him, kicking gently at the snow. "Do you think she knows everyone's talking about her?" Jack smiled. "I think she knows what matters. She's breathing. That's all she ever wanted." The boy nodded thoughtfully. "She's brave." Jack looked at the mare. "She's more than brave. She reminds us to be." They stood there until the sun disappeared. The cold crept back, but it felt gentler somehow, less cruel. Jack took a long breath, the air sharp and clean in his lungs. He couldn't remember the last time he'd felt gratitude like this. Quiet, unspoken, but heavy enough to fill the chest. Inside the house, the fire crackled low. Jack sat at the kitchen table with his notebook, the one with dirt-stained pages and broken spine. He flipped it open and wrote, "She stood against the storm. She didn't run." Then, after a pause, "Maybe I won't either." He stared at the words until they blurred, then set the pencil down. The wind had died completely, replaced by a deep, full silence. It was the kind of silence that felt earned. Later, as he stepped onto the porch, he saw lights twinkling from the neighboring houses, warm windows cutting through the cold. Somewhere in the distance, he heard the faint hum of a truck engine, the world already returning to its routines. But for Jack, something fundamental had shifted. He'd spent years thinking he was a man built for surviving, not living. Now he wasn't so sure. Luna lifted her head when he approached the barn. The moon had risen, silvering her coat until she looked almost transparent. Jack ran his hand along her neck, feeling the steady rhythm of her pulse. "You showed him, didn't you?" he whispered. "All of us." The mare blinked, soft and slow. He leaned against the stall, watching her settle into the straw. In the quiet, he could hear the two foals breathing nearby, their small hearts beating in sync. The world was rebuilding itself in tiny ways, heartbeat by heartbeat, breath by breath. As he turned to leave, he looked back once more. The mare's white body was a shape of calm in the shadowed light, her head resting low, eyes half closed. The air around her glowed faintly with warmth, as if the fire she'd faced had lit something inside her that would never go out. Jack whispered, "Rest easy, ghost horse. You earned it." When he stepped outside, the stars were sharp and cold overhead, scattered across the sky like nails in a carpenter's box. The valley stretched wide and clean, the snow untouched except for his footprints leading home. For the first time in years, Jack Turner didn't dread tomorrow. He knew the world could still break, still burn, but he also knew it could heal. And that was enough. By the time spring settled fully into the valley, the snow had turned to water, and the river that bordered Jack's pasture ran fast and clear. The land smelled of thawed earth and wet pine. For weeks he'd worked beside Tommy and Marianne, hauling boards, patching fences, rebuilding what the storm had stolen. Every nail driven felt like a small act of faith, something that said, "We're still here." Luna healed faster than anyone expected. The burns along her flank faded to pale scars that caught the sunlight like silver threads. She moved with a steadiness that seemed new, not fragile anymore, but sure. When Jack led her out to the paddock one morning, she tossed her head and trotted a wide circle before stopping to graze. It was a small thing, yet watching her, Jack felt his throat tighten. He'd forgotten that joy could be quiet. News of the ghost horse of Montana hadn't died down. The photo of Luna standing in the storm had spread far beyond their county. People mailed letters, some addressed only to the man with the white horse. Jack would come home to find envelopes tucked into the gate post, filled with stories. A soldier who'd lost a leg wrote that Luna made him believe in second chances. A widow sent a clipping of her late husband's horse, saying she saw his spirit in Luna's eyes. Jack read each letter at the kitchen table, sometimes aloud to Tommy, sometimes just in silence. "Guess she's teaching folks she doesn't even know," he said one evening, tucking the stack into his notebook. Marianne smiled over her cup of coffee. You ever think of letting people come meet her? Therapy groups, maybe? Kids, veterans? What she's done for you, she might do for others. Jack looked out the window toward the barn. I'm no preacher, he said. Just a man with a horse and too much land. That's all it takes sometimes, she replied. He didn't answer, but that night he couldn't sleep. The thought kept circling back, soft and insistent. Maybe this place could hold more than ghosts. Maybe it could hold healing. By summer, he'd cleared an old corral behind the barn, shaded by the line of cottonwoods that ran along the creek. He built benches from rough-cut lumber, strung lights overhead, and hung a sign carved from reclaimed wood. Hollow Creek Sanctuary. The first, visitors arrived quietly. 3 children from a nearby therapy center, each carrying their own small world of hurt. One boy wore sunglasses even in the shade. Another clutched a stuffed animal so tightly its seams were showing. Jack watched from the fence while Marianne introduced them to Luna. The mare stood still, patient, her breath soft against their hands. When one of the kids flinched at a bird's cry, Luna didn't move. She just lowered her head, letting the boy rest his cheek against her neck. Jack felt something in his chest give way. The stillness around them wasn't emptiness anymore. It was peace. Tommy helped out after school, guiding the children, teaching them how to brush Luna's coat. He'd grown taller, his voice deepening, but he still spoke to the horse like she was the only one who truly understood. You're famous, you know, he said one afternoon, grinning as Luna sniffed his pocket for treats. They should make a movie about you. Jack laughed from where he was stacking hay. If they did, they'd get it all wrong. Then maybe you should tell it yourself, Tommy said. Jack paused, leaning on the pitchfork. The idea seemed too big, too far. But later that night, he opened his notebook again. The pages were already filled with fragments, weather notes, small victories, lines of thought that had nowhere to go. On a clean sheet, he wrote, "If she keeps teaching, I'll keep learning." The days fell into rhythm again, feeding, tending, welcoming new visitors. The farm hummed with quiet purpose. Marianne joked that Jack had built himself a congregation without ever meaning to. He just smiled. One afternoon in late July, a van pulled into the drive. A man in a wheelchair rolled out, followed by a nurse. "You're Jack Turner?" he asked. "Name's Alan. I served in Kandahar. Lost this leg 8 years ago. Been trying to walk without hating the ground ever since. Heard about your horse." Jack led him to the paddock. Luna stood by the fence, her coat glistening under the summer sun. Alan reached out, his hand trembling slightly. The mare stepped forward, pressing her muzzle against his palm. The man's eyes filled, though he said nothing. Jack looked away, giving him the privacy of that moment. That night, under the soft hum of crickets, Jack sat on the porch with Marianne and Tommy. The sky was thick with stars. "Never figured I'd end up running a sanctuary," he said. Marianne smiled. "It's not about ending up. It's about beginning again." Tommy leaned back in his chair. "You think she knows what she started?" Jack looked toward the barn, where a single light glowed. "If she does, she ain't saying. But maybe she doesn't need to." When autumn came, the valley turned gold. Children's laughter replaced the silence that used to live there. The barn smelled of apples and hay. Jack carved another sign. This one smaller, hung inside the door where everyone could see. "Sit." It read, "We don't rescue horses. We heal alongside them." Sometimes in the cool evenings, he'd walk the fence line, watching Luna graze under the fading light. She'd look up when she felt him near, ears pricking. he'd whisper, "Look at what you've done, girl." And though she couldn't answer, her eyes held something that made words unnecessary. The town that once mocked him now sent volunteers. High school kids helped paint the fences. The mayor even stopped by with a donation check. "You've put this place back on the map," she said. Jack only shrugged. The truth was simpler. He hadn't built anything new. He'd just stopped hiding from what had always been waiting. By the first frost, the sanctuary had a rhythm of its own. Visitors, horses, laughter, silence. Jack kept writing in his notebook, documenting every small miracle. A child smiled today. A man found peace. The world felt kind for a minute. On the last page of the season's notes, he wrote one more line. "This light doesn't belong to me. I just get to hold it for a while." That evening, as the sun sank behind the hills, Jack stood at the fence with Luna beside him. Her breath turned to mist in the cooling air. Down by the creek, the first geese were gathering to fly south. He rested a hand on her shoulder. "Harvest time," he said. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" The mare leaned into his touch, her warmth steady against the chill. The wind rustled through the cottonwoods, scattering the last of the yellow leaves like quiet applause. In that soft twilight, Jack Turner finally understood what he'd been searching for all those years. Not redemption, not forgiveness, but the simple grace of belonging to something good. And as the lights of Hollow Creek Sanctuary flickered on, one by one, the valley glowed, not with fame or noise, but with the steady, enduring brightness of lives mended in the same light. Winter came quietly that year, the kind that didn't roar but sighed its way into the valley. Frost gathered along the fence rails, and the mornings were all silver breath and slow-moving sun. Hollow Creek lay hushed under its thin sheet of snow, peaceful in the way only a place full of living things could be. Jack Turner moved slower these days, but his steps were steady. His hair had gone mostly gray, and his hands, those same hands that had once been raw from rope and work, now trembled when he buttoned his coat. Still, every dawn found him at the barn. Luna was older too. Her eyes had clouded with the soft haze of age, and her pace had slowed, but she still greeted him with a nicker, low and warm, every morning. Her coat gleamed pale as the snow, and Jack liked to think the light came from inside her, not the other way around. She didn't need to prove anything anymore. She simply was. The sanctuary had grown beyond what Jack could have imagined. There were new stalls now, a larger paddock, a shaded area for therapy sessions. Children came in vans from as far as Billings, their laughter rising like birds over the pasture. Veterans found quiet there, the kind they couldn't find anywhere else. And through it all, Luna remained at the heart of it, the old, gentle constant. Tommy, now 17, handled most of the work. He'd grown tall, his once awkward movements turned sure. He spoke easily to the visitors, guiding them, teaching them how to move slow, to listen. Jack often watched him from the porch, pride and something softer curling in his chest. One evening, as the sun slid down behind the hills, he said, "You know, kid, you've done more good here than I ever did." Tommy smiled, shaking his head. "You started it." Jack chuckled. "I just followed a horse." The first real snow came in late December. It arrived in silence, blanketing the fields, muting the world. Jack woke to find everything washed clean, even the scars left by old storms. He stepped outside, the cold biting his cheeks, and watched Luna standing in the field. The morning light caught her breath as it left her body, a small cloud of warmth against the frozen air. "Hey, girl," he called softly. She turned her head, ears twitching toward his voice. He waded through the snow until he reached her. The air smelled of pine and faraway smoke. When he laid a hand on her neck, she leaned into him the way she always had. He felt her heart beating beneath his palm, slow and steady. "We made it through another one," he whispered. "Didn't think we'd see so many winters, did you?" She blinked, her breath curling into the wind, and for a long moment they stood that way, two survivors bound by the quiet language of endurance. A few weeks later, the temperature dropped hard. The cold was sharper, deeper than any before. Jack could feel it in his bones, the same way he felt the changes in her. Luna tired easily now, lying down more often, rising slower each time. Marianne visited with her medical bag, checking her heart, her joints, her lungs. "She's old," she said gently, touching Jack's shoulder. "But she's not suffering. When it's time, you'll know." Jack nodded, though the words caught somewhere deep. "Yeah," he said, "I'll know." The days shortened. The valley seemed to hold its breath. Each morning, he brought Luna warm mash and brushed her coat until it shone. Some days, he'd read aloud from the old notebook, the one he'd been filling for years. Lines about storms, laughter, silence, about light. "Remember this one?" he said one afternoon, flipping to a page from years ago. "She stood against the storm and didn't run." "That was you, wasn't it?" She exhaled, a long, quiet sigh that steamed in the cold air. That night, the sky cleared, and the stars came out sharp and countless. The moon hung low, painting the snow in blue light. Jack couldn't sleep. He dressed, pulled on his boots, and walked to the barn. Luna was standing, her head turned east toward the ridge. The air inside was warm, filled with the steady rhythm of horses breathing. "Couldn't sleep either, huh?" he said. She flicked an ear, but didn't move. He reached out, his fingers brushing her muzzle. "You can rest now if you need to." The mare lowered her head and pressed her forehead lightly against his chest. The gesture was so familiar, it hurt. Jack felt her breath, slow and warm against him. "Thank you," he whispered. When the dawn came, the light broke soft and golden. The world glittered. Jack stood in the doorway of the barn, hands stuffed into his coat pockets, his breath rising in slow clouds. Luna lay in the center of the field, her body folded in the snow, still and peaceful. The other horses stood near her, silent. He walked out, each step sinking deep into the frost. When he reached her, he knelt and placed a hand on her neck. The cold had already begun to settle, but her coat still held the faintest trace of warmth. "You found your light, girl," he said softly. "You were the light." The valley stayed quiet that day. Tommy came, eyes red, and helped Jack bury her beneath the big pine by the curve of the fence, the same spot where the snow first melted every spring. They laid a smooth cedar plank at the head, and Jack burned her name into it with his pocket knife. Luna. She was the light. The weeks that followed felt strange, too still. The barn was full of life, but missing a heartbeat. Visitors came, unaware of what had changed, and still found peace there. Children brushed the other horses. Veterans sat by the fence in silence. The sanctuary lived on. Yet every evening, Jack found himself walking to that pine, tracing the carved letters with his fingers, as if touching them could keep the story from ending. But stories, he realized, don't end when someone stops breathing. They end when people stop remembering. In early spring, the first thaw came early. Snow slid from the roof in soft avalanches. Grass poked through near the pine. Jack sat on the porch, notebook open, watching the light move across the fields. He wrote slowly, his hands less sure than they used to be. They said the light would fade, he wrote, but it never does. It just finds new eyes to shine through. Tommy joined him, setting down 2 mugs of coffee. "Kids are asking about Luna," he said. "I told them she's still here, just different." Jack smiled faintly. "You told him right." The wind carried the smell of rain and soil, the promise of another season. Down in the pasture, one of the younger mares lifted her head, pale-coated, with Luna's same quiet eyes. She trotted toward the fence, tail flicking. Jack closed his notebook, slipping it into his coat pocket. "Looks like the light's already found where it wants to go," he murmured. As the sun climbed higher, the valley shimmered with that old, familiar glow, the same light that had once fallen on a frightened filly and a broken man, binding them together through storms and silence. Now it lived in the horses, in the children's laughter, in every person who stepped through the gates of Hollow Creek seeking something they couldn't name. Jack Turner stood, his shadow stretching long behind him, and whispered to the wind, "Thank you, girl." The breeze stirred, lifting the edge of his coat, warm against the morning chill. And for a heartbeat, just one, he swore he heard her. A soft nicker in the distance, the sound of grace that never really leaves. If this story touched your heart, tell me what moment stayed with you the most. I'd love to read your thoughts below. And if you believe stories like this still matter, hit that subscribe button and stay with us for the next one. Because sometimes the quietest tales hold the strongest light.